Derek Harrison smiled smugly as he handed me the rejection letter, telling me that motherhood and executive leadership don't mix well. 3 years later, I walked into that same corner office as the new CEO of Meridian Industries, watching his face turn white as he realized the pregnant woman he dismissed had just become his boss. The security guards were already waiting outside his door with a cardboard box. But let me start from the beginning, because watching a sexist pig lose everything he worked for requires the full story to truly appreciate the beauty of it all. It started on a Tuesday morning in March, when I was 6 months pregnant with my first child. I'd been working at Meridian Industries for 5 years, climbing from junior marketing associate to senior marketing manager. My track record was flawless: 3 major client acquisitions, a 40% revenue increase in my department, and consistently exceeding every target they set for me. The regional marketing director position had been dangled in front of me for months, with Derek promising it was mine after the quarterly review. I walked into his office that morning, expecting congratulations and a salary bump. Instead, I got a masterclass in workplace discrimination. Derek barely looked up from his computer as he delivered the news that would change both our lives forever. "Emma, you know I can't promote someone who's about to have a baby," Derek said, his voice dripping with condescension. I stood there in my maternity dress, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. 5 years of 60-hour weeks, missed dinners, weekend projects, and business trips that kept me away from my husband, James. All of it meant nothing because I was carrying a child. Derek finally looked up, his cold gray eyes showing zero remorse. Pregnant women can't handle the stress of leadership positions. It wouldn't be fair to the team or the company. He leaned back in his leather chair, clearly enjoying the power trip. "Maybe after maternity leave, we can revisit this conversation, assuming you come back, of course." The way he said it made it clear he hoped I wouldn't. That was his first mistake. I walked out of Derek's office in a daze, but by the time I reached my car, the shock had transformed into something much more dangerous: cold, calculated fury. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, my hands shaking as I processed what had just happened. Derek had essentially told me that being a woman disqualified me from advancement, that my 5 years of excellence meant nothing compared to my reproductive choices. I pulled out my phone and started recording a voice memo, documenting every word of our conversation while it was still fresh. Then I drove home and did something Derek would later regret for the rest of his career. I called my sister Rachel. Rachel wasn't just any sister. She was a partner at Goldman Sachs with connections that could move mountains. And she was about to help me move Derek's entire world. That evening, James found me at the kitchen table with my laptop, surrounded by printed emails and performance reviews. "What's all this?" he asked, setting down 2 cups of tea. I looked up at my husband, this gentle man who'd supported every crazy dream I'd ever had. "I'm building a case," I said simply. Derek just made the biggest mistake of his life. James sat down across from me, concern creasing his forehead. "Emma, you're 6 months pregnant. Maybe you should just focus on the baby and find another job after." I shook my head, feeling the fire in my chest burn brighter. That's exactly what he's counting on, that I'll just disappear quietly and let him win. I turned my laptop screen toward James, showing him the organizational chart I'd been studying. Derek Harrison has no idea who he just declared war on. The next morning, I called Maria Rodriguez, an employment lawyer Rachel had recommended. Maria specialized in discrimination cases and had a reputation for making companies pay dearly for their mistakes. When I walked into her office, she listened intently as I laid out everything that had happened. "Do you have any of this in writing?" she asked, leaning forward with interest. I smiled and pulled out my phone, showing her the text Derek had sent me before our meeting. "Looking forward to discussing your career trajectory tomorrow. We'll need to consider all factors, including your upcoming family obligations." Maria's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "This is textbook pregnancy discrimination." He put it in writing. She leaned back in her chair, already calculating damages. "Emma, by the time we're done with Meridian Industries, Derek Harrison will wish he'd never learned your name." While Maria worked on the legal angle, I started my own investigation into Derek's past. It didn't take long to find the pattern. Over his 12 years at Meridian, Derek had consistently passed over qualified women for promotions, especially those with families. I found 3 other women who'd left the company after similar experiences, and 2 current employees who were afraid to speak up. But the real goldmine came when I hacked into Derek's email account. Yes, I said hacked. My computer science degree wasn't just for show. What I found in those emails would have made a feminist's blood boil. Jokes about hormonal women, complaints about pregnancy leave abuse, and worst of all, a thread with other male executives about keeping the leadership team testosterone heavy. Derek had been systematically discriminating against women for years, and he'd been stupid enough to document it all. Armed with evidence that could sink Derek's career, I made my next move. I scheduled a meeting with Meridian's CEO, Robert Chen, under the pretense of discussing my transition plan for maternity leave. Robert was a decent man who'd built Meridian from the ground up, and I was betting his integrity would outweigh his loyalty to Derek. I walked into his office with a manila folder thick with evidence. "Robert, I need to show you something that could destroy this company's reputation," I said, setting the folder on his desk. His face went pale as he read through Derek's emails, the discrimination complaints, and the pattern of behavior I'd documented. "Jesus Christ, Emma, how long has this been going on?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 12 years, I replied. "And if this goes public, Meridian Industries will be front-page news for all the wrong reasons." Robert Chen was furious, but not at me. He was smart enough to know that Derek had created a legal nightmare that could cost the company millions. "What do you want, Emma?" he asked, closing the folder. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. "I want Derek gone, and I want the regional marketing director position he denied me. But more than that, I want to make sure this never happens to another woman at this company." Robert nodded slowly. "Consider it done. Derek will be terminated by the end of the week." But I wasn't finished. "There's one more thing, Robert. I want to be involved in choosing Derek's replacement. Someone who understands that talent doesn't disappear when you get pregnant." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Derek's discrimination had just fast-tracked my career in ways his promotion never could have. Derek's termination was swift and brutal. Robert called him into his office on Friday afternoon with HR present and laid out the evidence of his discrimination. I wasn't there, but I heard from colleagues that Derek's face went from confusion to panic to rage in about 30 seconds. He tried to deny everything, then blame it on company culture, then finally resorted to claiming his emails were taken out of context. None of it worked. By 5 p.m., Derek Harrison was cleaning out his desk while security watched. The regional marketing director position was officially mine, along with a significant salary increase and a formal apology from the company. But watching Derek pack his personal items into a cardboard box was just the appetizer. The main course was still being prepared, and it would be served at the perfect temperature. Ice cold. My maternity leave was supposed to be 3 months of quiet bonding time with my new daughter, Sophie. Instead, it became 3 months of strategic planning that would reshape the entire marketing industry. While Derek struggled to find new employment, word travels fast in our field. I was building relationships that would make my return to work unforgettable. Rachel introduced me to venture capitalists, private equity firms, and industry insiders who were always looking for the next big acquisition target. Meridian Industries, despite its recent HR cleanup, was struggling with market share and outdated strategies. It was ripe for a takeover, and I was about to become the person holding the knife. Derek had no idea that his former subordinate was orchestrating his complete professional destruction from a nursery chair while feeding her baby. 6 months after returning from maternity leave, I got the call that would change everything. Marcus Webb from Titan Capital wanted to discuss acquiring Meridian Industries. They'd been watching the company's performance and saw potential, but they needed someone on the inside who understood the business. Someone with a track record of success and intimate knowledge of the company's operations. "We've heard excellent things about your work, Emma," Marcus said during our lunch meeting. "If this acquisition goes through, we'd want you to lead the transition as CEO." I nearly choked on my water. CEO. The position Derek had essentially told me I'd never be qualified for because I was a mother. "What about current leadership?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Marcus smiled coldly. "Clean slate. New ownership, new management. We believe in promoting talent, regardless of personal circumstances." The acquisition moved faster than anyone expected. Titan Capital had deep pockets, and Robert Chen was ready to retire anyway. Within 8 weeks, the deal was structured and ready for approval. The only people who knew about my involvement were Titan's executive team and me. Derek, now working as a freelance marketing consultant after being blacklisted by most major firms, had no idea that his former victim was about to become his judge, jury, and executioner. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning in November. That's when Meridian Industries would officially become a subsidiary of Titan Capital. And Emma Walsh, the pregnant woman who supposedly couldn't handle leadership, would be announced as the new CEO. The irony was so perfect, it felt like cosmic justice. The morning of the announcement, I stood in my walk-in closet, choosing the perfect outfit for Derek's professional funeral. I settled on a sharp black suit that commanded respect and reminded everyone in the room that I was back from maternity leave, stronger than ever. Sophie was with the nanny, James was at his office, and I was about to walk into the most satisfying meeting of my career. I arrived at Meridian's headquarters 30 minutes early, watching through the lobby windows as employees filtered in for what they thought was a routine all-hands meeting. Derek had been invited as a consulting expert to discuss the transition. Robert's final gift to me. He had no idea he was walking into his own execution. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked into the conference room where Derek sat at the table, looking smug and self-important. His expression when he saw me enter was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert Chen announced to the packed conference room, "I'm pleased to introduce you to Emma Walsh, the new CEO of Meridian Industries under Titan Capital ownership." The silence was deafening. Derek's face went through several colors: confusion, disbelief, then a sickly green that suggested he might vomit. I walked to the front of the room, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor like a countdown timer. "Thank you, Robert, and thank you all for being here today." I looked directly at Derek, whose mouth was hanging open like a fish gasping for air. As we transition into this new chapter, we'll be making some significant changes to ensure our company culture reflects modern values of equality and respect. The room buzzed with whispers, but Derek remained frozen in his chair, finally understanding that the woman he'd dismissed as just a pregnant employee had just become his boss. After the general announcement, I called Derek into my new office. The same corner office where he'd destroyed my dreams 18 months earlier. He walked in like a man heading to his own funeral, which wasn't far from the truth. "Sit down, Derek," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. The same chair where I'd sat pregnant and humiliated while he explained why motherhood disqualified me from leadership. Now the roles were reversed, and the symmetry was beautiful. "I suppose you're wondering why I asked you here," I continued, enjoying every second of his discomfort. Derek's voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Emma, I had no idea about your involvement with Titan Capital." His hands were shaking slightly, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Of course you didn't," I replied. "You were too busy assuming pregnant women couldn't handle complex business strategies." I opened Derek's consulting file and pretended to review it, letting the silence stretch until he squirmed in his seat. "Your contract with Meridian ends today," I said finally, looking up to meet his terrified eyes. "But before you go, I want you to understand something. When you told me that motherhood and leadership don't mix, you made the biggest mistake of your career." Derek opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. You see, Derek, being a mother didn't make me weaker. It made me more determined, more strategic, and infinitely more motivated to prove sexist pigs like you wrong." I leaned back in my chair, his old chair, and smiled. "Congratulations, Derek, you played yourself." The fear in his eyes was intoxicating. He knew his career was over, and he knew exactly who had orchestrated its destruction. "What do you want from me?" Derek whispered, his arrogance finally cracking completely. I'd been waiting for this question for 18 months. I want you to remember this moment for the rest of your life, I said, standing up and walking around the desk. I want you to remember that you had the chance to promote a qualified woman, and instead you chose discrimination. I want you to remember that your bias didn't just hurt me, it destroyed you. Derek's face was pale, his hands clenched in his lap. Emma, please. I have a mortgage, kids in college. I can't afford to be blacklisted from the industry. His desperation was music to my ears. You should have thought about that before you decided pregnant women couldn't handle responsibility, I replied coldly. Security will escort you out. Your personal items are already packed. The cardboard box sat on the corner of my desk like a trophy. Derek stood on shaky legs, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap and ill-fitting. This is revenge, he said, his voice barely audible. I smiled, the same cold smile he'd given me in this very office. No, Derek, this is consequences. Revenge would have been petty and emotional. This is just business, the same business logic you used when you decided my pregnancy disqualified me from leadership. He reached for the cardboard box, his movements slow and defeated. You destroyed my career, he whispered. No, I corrected him. You destroyed your own career the moment you let your prejudice override your judgment. I just made sure the consequences caught up with you. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway, their presence making Derek's humiliation complete. The man who'd once held all the power was now being escorted out like a common criminal. Word of Derek's dismissal spread through the marketing industry like wildfire. Within days, the story had reached trade publications, professional networks, and industry blogs. Former VP terminated for pregnancy discrimination, replaced by his victim, was the headline that appeared in Marketing Weekly. Derek's name became synonymous with workplace bias, making him radioactive to potential employers. Meanwhile, my story became something else entirely. A cautionary tale about underestimating determined women and inspiration for working mothers everywhere. Speaking requests poured in, job offers from competitors arrived daily, and my LinkedIn profile became a case study in turning discrimination into career advancement. Derek had inadvertently made me the poster child for everything he claimed I couldn't be. 6 months into my role as CEO, Meridian Industries had its best quarter in company history. Revenue was up 60%, client retention hit an all-time high, and employee satisfaction scores soared after we implemented family-friendly policies that Derek had blocked for years. The board of directors was thrilled. Titan Capital was planning additional investments, and I was being featured on magazine covers as one of the rising stars in corporate leadership. The same leadership abilities Derek claimed I didn't possess because I was pregnant. Every success felt like another nail in the coffin of his small-minded worldview. Meanwhile, Derek was working part-time for a small agency in the suburbs, making a fraction of his former salary, and watching his former industry colleagues distance themselves from his toxic reputation. The final piece of my revenge came exactly 2 years after Derek's discrimination. I was invited to speak at the National Marketing Conference, the industry's biggest annual event. The keynote address was titled "Breaking Barriers: How Motherhood Made Me a Better Leader." As I stood on stage, looking out at an audience of 2,000 marketing professionals, I spotted a familiar face in the back row. Derek Harrison, probably hoping to network his way back into relevance, sat alone while people around him chatted excitedly about my presentation. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw the complete defeat in his expression. He knew, as did everyone else in that room, that the pregnant woman he'd dismissed as unfit for leadership was now the most powerful person in their industry. 2 years ago, I began my speech. A manager told me that motherhood and executive leadership don't mix. He said pregnant women couldn't handle the stress of important decisions. The audience murmured sympathetically. Today, I'm here to tell you that being a mother didn't make me a worse leader. It made me a better one. It taught me to be more efficient with my time, more strategic with my decisions, and more determined to succeed. I paused, looking directly at Derek in the back row, and it taught me that anyone who judges your capabilities based on your personal circumstances probably isn't smart enough to be making those judgments in the first place. The audience erupted in applause while Derek quietly slipped out the back door, his networking mission a complete failure. After my speech, reporters and industry leaders surrounded me with questions about my journey from discrimination victim to CEO. "What would you say to other women facing similar challenges?" a journalist asked. I thought about Derek, probably driving home to his suburban apartment, his career in ruins because he'd underestimated the wrong woman. I'd tell them that discrimination says nothing about your abilities and everything about your discriminator's character. I replied, "Don't let anyone else's limited imagination define your potential." The truth was, Derek had done me a favor. His discrimination had forced me to think bigger, aim higher, and build a network powerful enough to acquire his entire company. He'd wanted to keep me small, but instead he'd given me the motivation to become unstoppable. Today, I run a company worth $50 million, employ over 300 people, and have a beautiful daughter who will grow up knowing that her mother never accepted limitations imposed by small-minded men. Derek Harrison occasionally appears in my peripheral vision at industry events, a cautionary tale of what happens when prejudice meets consequence. His career never recovered from our encounter, while mine reached heights he'd never imagined possible. Sometimes people ask if I feel guilty about destroying his professional life. The answer is simple: you reap what you sow. Derek planted seeds of discrimination and sexism for 12 years. I just made sure he got to harvest the full crop. The pregnant woman he dismissed as unfit for leadership had become everything he tried to prevent: powerful, successful, and completely untouchable. And every morning when I walk into my corner office, I remember that revenge isn't always about anger. Sometimes it's about proving that their worst fears about your potential were actually your greatest strengths.